And
Yeah, so for me, the domestic abuse I experienced was physical, it was emotional, psychological, sexual and financial. And 14 months of abuse undid 3 decades of lifestyle and career choices. It cost me my home, it almost cost me my life.
what was the most impacting thing about it?
When I look back at the time, I would have said the physical, because I had a fractured skull, fractured ribs, fractured cheekbones, when actually in reality the hidden aspect of the abuse, the psychological abuse, was certainly the most impacted, because it took me to the point where I was ready to take my own life.
And you're still trying to get funding to help get that cosmetic surgery for what's happened to you?
Absolutely, and I think it is astonishing actually that 7 years on from when in fact 8 years on from when I was rescued, the NHS will still not treat the scarring that I have as a sole result of the violence that I experienced. It's deemed as cosmetic surgery.
And do you think that's because the support services are limited to people like you?
I think certainly we only have to look at what's gone on recently with the acid attacks, for example, in a pub in London. And quite rightly, those victims, to reduce the impact of that horrific crime, are having scar revision surgery. And so all I'm asking for is the same, because I have a permanent souvenir, a reminder of what I experienced.
So could you tell me a little bit about, as I know the person who was victimising you actually was sexually assaulting you. Could you tell me a little bit about what happened there?
So Michelle, just imagine, Michelle was 5'1" and 7 stone. How could she possibly overpower me? Psychological abuse, sapping my energy. And for Michelle, there was never any remorse. The assaults would tend to stop if somewhere on my body I spurted blood. That seemed to pacify her. But then, as opposed to receiving a futile apology, Michelle would send me out to buy cigarettes, planting a mobile phone in my hand, controlling my movements outside of the property.
So what do you think the services should have done to help you? Because this went to court, didn't it?
So having gone through the court process and Michelle was found guilty, the questions I would ask is, why as the victim would my ex-partner, the perpetrator, be bailed back to a property that she didn't own? There's question one. Was it appropriate, given the significance of my injuries, that I was actually left in a night shelter for the homeless and not a refuge? And was it appropriate for me to be left homeless in Salvation Army accommodation for 18 months? And to anyone listening to this, I ask you this simply. What would the reaction be in your community if that happened to a female victim? Because first and foremost, we are both victims.
What do you think needs to change because of the actions of the authorities, because of what happened to you? What services do you think need to be in place?
Well, I think the length and breadth of the country, what I would ask the professions to do is to walk in the shoes of a victim to survivor status. And 2 primary examples. If you walk in the shoes of 2 female victims, one of whom is heterosexual, one of whom is gay, and the gay female did not get the same support, what would the reaction be? And your appetite to address that will be clearly evident. The appetite should be the same when you undertake that comparison between a female victim and a male. And sadly, across the country, that appetite is at different levels. So we need to change, we need to be all inclusive, and we need to be consistent in how we support victims.
Does it worry you that there aren't any safe houses in London for male victims?
Absolutely. Imagine being in a situation where you're absolutely frightened of your own shadow, you've got no support in place, no access to finances, and you're actually exposed on the streets, already vulnerable, to be left even more vulnerable to further abuse. It's just not acceptable in 2017, and that's shocking.